A decorated army colonel. A fallen soldier's remains. And a flight he was denied. What happened next shook the entire country. The airport buzzed with its usual chaos, families dragging wheeled suitcases, business travelers glued to their phones, children darting ahead of tired parents. Amid the crowd, Colonel David Carter stepped inside, the sharp click of his polished dress shoes echoing off the tiled floor. He had walked through terminals like this countless times. But today was different. The weight he carried wasn't just from the medals pinned to his uniform. It came from the casket waiting on the tarmac, draped in the American flag. Private First Class Jason Reynolds. 21 years old. Gone too soon. Colonel Carter adjusted his hat and took a breath, steady and controlled. This wasn't just a flight. It was a mission. A solemn vow to a fallen soldier. One that transcended protocol, rank, or recognition. No one gets left behind. He approached the airline counter, military orders and ID in hand. The woman behind the desk barely looked up as she typed into her computer. A frown appeared. Then a pause, a beat too long. "Sir, can I see that again?" she asked, her voice suddenly tight. Carter handed over his documents again, watching her carefully. The flicker of hesitation. A quick glance to a nearby coworker. The subtle shift in her stance. He'd seen it before. And it always meant trouble. She leaned over, whispering something to another agent. The man looked over at Carter. His face unreadable. When she returned, her smile was stiff, forced. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's an issue with your ticket. We can't allow you to board at this time." Carter remained calm. He had stared down enemies in combat zones, negotiated in tense diplomatic rooms. But this felt different. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier," he said, his tone controlled, tapping the paperwork. "Everything is in order." She didn't meet his eyes. "I understand, sir. But there's a security protocol. We can't override it." "Security protocol?" His voice stayed level. "Yes, sir," she replied with another weak smile. "It's just policy." Carter didn't flinch. He stood his ground. "What policy?" Behind him, the line grew restless. People began to take notice. Whispers. Shifting feet. Curious glances. A man in uniform being denied a flight. That wasn't something you saw every day. Carter remained composed. "Ma'am, I need to understand the issue. This is an official military assignment. Not a personal trip. My documentation is valid." Another pause. More whispering behind the counter. Then a supervisor stepped forward, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a rehearsed smile. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience," he began, using that soft, professional tone designed to avoid confrontation. "But we have policies in place. Unfortunately, we can't override them at this time." That word again. Policies. Carter took a breath through his nose. Measured. Controlled. "I've flown with military escorts before. I know the procedure. And I know there's no policy preventing this. So let's be honest, what's the real reason I'm being denied?" The supervisor shifted on his feet. "It's just an extra security measure. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." Carter clenched his jaw. He knew this dance. Vague reasons. Hidden intentions. They were testing him. Hoping he'd lose his composure. Give them an excuse to escalate. But he wouldn't. From the line, a voice cut through the tension. "Sir, is this about his military clearance?" Carter turned slightly. The voice came from an older man in a worn USMC cap. A Marine. A veteran. "No, sir," the supervisor said, clearly uncomfortable. This isn't about clearance. We just have to follow protocol. The Marine scoffed. Yeah. I've been through security 100 times, and I've never seen protocol stop a soldier from bringing one of our own home. He crossed his arms. So what is it really? The crowd stirred. Phones came out. Cameras started recording. The air around the counter grew heavy with scrutiny. The agent who denied Carter looked nervous now. Glancing sideways at her supervisor, unsure. The supervisor rubbed his temple and muttered, "Let me check something," before walking away. Carter stood motionless. Tall. Steady. But the energy around him shifted. The whispers turned into questions. The questions turned into outrage. A young woman stepped forward, hesitant but brave. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, holding up her phone, "but they're not letting you board." Her voice wasn't loud, but her words cut through the noise. "That's correct," Carter replied calmly. She turned her screen toward him. "I'm live. People need to see this." And that's when the floodgates opened. "This is wrong," a man near the back said, holding up his phone. "This man is escorting a fallen soldier." Others joined in. A woman waved toward the counter. "Hey! Can someone explain why he's being denied?" More voices. More phones. More outrage. The staff behind the counter froze. The situation had shifted beyond their control. Then the Marine stepped forward again, voice hard as stone. "I've seen a lot in my time. But I never thought I'd see the day when an American soldier, especially one escorting a brother in arms, was treated like this." Silence fell across the terminal. Even the background announcements seemed to fade. All that remained were the soft clicks and beeps of recording phones and a rising tide of anger. "This is a disgrace," the Marine said. The agent behind the counter fumbled with her keyboard, hands shaking. The supervisor hadn't returned. The line of passengers was no longer a line. It was a crowd. A witness. An audience to a brewing firestorm. And somewhere in that crowd, a voice muttered, "It's already trending." Carter didn't move. He didn't need to. The story had taken on a life of its own. Within moments, a woman near the windows held up her phone. "It's on Twitter," she gasped. The tweet, written in bold caps, read: "They just denied a black U.S. Army colonel his flight while escorting a fallen soldier's remains. This is how we treat our heroes. Hashtag let him fly." Retweets. Comments. Likes. Climbing by the second. Then another tweet, this one from a national veterans organization. "We are aware of the disgraceful incident unfolding at airport name. Our soldiers deserve better. Action is coming." The narrative had slipped from the airline's hands. Now, the country was watching. The agent behind the counter stepped back, pale and panicked, before disappearing through a frosted glass door. She wasn't looking for answers. She was calling for backup. Carter straightened his uniform. He had seen powerful institutions panic before, when they realized they had chosen the wrong man to mistreat. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Because the real storm hadn't even started, core of it all, this wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. It was about respect. About dignity. About honoring a young man who gave everything for a country that, too often, failed to live up to its own promises. Colonel Carter remained still, his posture immaculate, a living emblem of calm under pressure. Then the frosted glass door opened. The supervisor returned, and this time, he wasn't alone. Flanking him was a woman in a navy blue blazer with a badge clipped to her lapel, airport security or perhaps a public relations officer. Her steps were brisk, her expression tight, rehearsed but urgent. She scanned the gathered crowd, the phones, the faces, and then her eyes landed on Carter. "Colonel Carter," she said, her voice loud enough to be heard without a microphone, "I want to offer a sincere apology on behalf of the airline. There has clearly been a serious misunderstanding." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras stayed up. Carter didn't blink. "I'm listening." She swallowed, nodding. "Your documentation is valid. There were no issues with your clearance. This should never have happened. We are clearing you for immediate boarding, and we've arranged for a private escort to the plane. You'll be allowed to accompany the remains personally, as protocol demands." The supervisor beside her looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Too late." But Carter only nodded. "And the staff involved?" The PR woman hesitated. "We are initiating an internal review. I can assure you this will be addressed." "Not good enough." "Not nearly." The Marine stepped forward again. "No. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. This man was humiliated. On duty. In uniform. In front of all of us." Another man added, "You weren't sorry until the internet saw it." Applause broke out, not loud, not rowdy, but steady and strong, like a drumbeat of dignity. Carter turned slightly, acknowledging the support with a single nod, but he kept his gaze on the woman in the blazer. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about Jason Reynolds. Private first class. 21 years old. That's who we failed today. I won't let that go unnoticed." The woman's expression faltered. She glanced at the crowd, then at Carter. "Would you allow us to issue a formal statement? Recognizing your service and his sacrifice?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "You mean a photo op?" She flinched. "No, Colonel. A real acknowledgement. We can work with the Department of Defense and—" "No," he interrupted gently but firmly. "You can start by making sure this never happens to another soldier again. You don't need a press release for that. You need a policy." The silence that followed was loud. Phones kept filming. She nodded slowly. "Understood." An airline employee approached, this one younger, nervous, holding a boarding pass in trembling fingers. "Sir," he said quietly, "your flight is ready. We'll escort you now." Carter took the ticket. His fingers brushed the paper with quiet finality. Then he looked back at the crowd. At the Marine. At the young woman still holding her phone live, tears brimming in her eyes. At the many who had stood when it mattered. "Thank you," he said simply. He turned and began walking toward the gate, the hallway parting for him. A hush followed in his wake, reverent, heavy, electric. Cameras lowered. Heads bowed. A few people saluted. At the window, a child whispered to his mother, "Who is he?" She bent low, her voice soft. "That's a hero." On the tarmac, the casket waited, draped in red, white, and blue. And as Colonel Carter approached, the honor guard stood at attention, saluting not just the fallen but the man who never wavered. And across the country, as the story went viral, as news anchors picked it up, as hashtags rose and statements were issued and consequences were finally considered, something deeper took root. A reminder. That silence in the face of injustice is complicity. That honor cannot be denied by a gate agent or buried under corporate policy. That even in crowded terminals filled with noise and indifference, dignity can still make itself heard. And that no soldier should ever come home alone. The next morning, headlines exploded across every major platform. Veteran denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier, public outrage erupts. Colonel Carter stands tall, a nation responds. Dignity denied, honor restored. Clips from the airport, shaky phone footage, sharp words, the calm authority of Colonel Carter, circulated everywhere. News anchors recapped the incident, panelists debated systemic bias, and veterans across the country shared their own stories of being mistreated in uniform. But the most powerful moment came not from a network or an influencer, but from the Reynolds family. Jason's mother, Tamika Reynolds, released a video from her living room in Macon, Georgia. Her voice trembled but held steady, wrapped in grief and pride. A folded flag rested on the mantel behind her. Jason's graduation photo stood nearby, alongside a framed picture of him in uniform, smiling. "I want to thank Colonel Carter," she began. "We didn't know him before this. But he showed more respect for my son's life in one moment than that airline showed in all its training. He stood up for Jason when Jason couldn't stand for himself. And I will never forget that." Her words cracked. She paused, wiped her eyes. "He didn't just carry my son's body. He carried his memory. And now, he's carried his legacy too." Within hours, the clip had millions of views. Veterans groups mobilized. Petitions were launched. The Department of Transportation opened an inquiry into how airlines treat service members. And that airline? Within 72 hours, they issued a second statement, this time with action. A new military priority respect policy was unveiled. All frontline staff were to undergo mandatory training on military protocols. Colonel Carter was offered a formal apology, and a seat on the advisory board to help reform their practices. He declined the position. But he did offer one sentence in return. "Honor is not an initiative. It's a choice. One you make every day." Back in Georgia, days after the funeral, Colonel Carter visited the Reynolds family. No cameras. No announcements. Just a man carrying a flag in a wooden case, and the solemn gratitude of someone who had served too long to believe in empty gestures. Tamika hugged him like a brother. Jason's younger sister, only 10, asked, "Did you know him well?" Carter knelt and placed the flag in her hands. "No," he said. "But I know what he stood for. And I'll carry that forward." Weeks later, at a small VFW hall in Virginia, Carter spoke at a gathering of veterans. He didn't speak of airlines. Or cameras. Or trending hashtags. He spoke of Jason. Of the weight of escorting a fallen brother. Of the ache of watching a family break beneath ceremony. And of the fire that lit in him, not from anger, but from duty. "I didn't go viral," he told them. "We did." He looked around the room. Gray hair. Walking sticks. Prosthetics. Quiet eyes that had seen too much and been thanked too little. "You ever wonder why we salute?" he asked. A few nodded. "It's not about rank." "Not really. It's about recognition. A sign that says, I see you. I honor you. You matter." He paused. "So let's start saluting more. Not just in uniform. In action. In advocacy. In how we protect one another out there. Because honor doesn't end with the uniform. It begins with how we treat those who wear it, and those they leave behind." The hall stood in silence. Then one by one, the men and women rose. And saluted. Colonel Carter never chased the spotlight. But it found him anyway. Not because he sought justice with anger. But because he carried it with grace. Because sometimes, the quiet strength of one man, standing firm in an airport terminal, can shake a nation to its core. And remind us all. That dignity is not negotiable. That service never ends. And that every homecoming, no matter how quiet, deserves honor. Especially the final 1.6 months later, the ripple effects were still being felt. The Department of Veterans Affairs, spurred by public demand and Carter's unintended movement, initiated a new national awareness campaign titled "Silent Ranks, Loud Respect." It featured portraits of veterans, young and old, in uniform and in civilian clothes, with stories of moments they'd been overlooked, dismissed, or disrespected. The goal wasn't pity. It was recognition. At the heart of the campaign sat one image. Colonel Carter, in dress blues, standing tall on the airport jet bridge, his back straight, his eyes steady, his hands holding the flag-draped casket of Jason Reynolds. The caption read simply, "Respect isn't earned through conflict. It's revealed in silence." Meanwhile, the airline industry quietly adopted broader changes. Now, when a service member, active or retired, checked in for a flight, the system flagged their reservation with a discreet badge that offered not privilege, but priority respect. And more importantly, empathy. Gate agents were trained not only in logistics but in language. They no longer asked, "What's in the case?" They said, "Thank you for what you carry." Colonel Carter himself returned to quiet living. He declined interviews. Declined book deals. Declined political offers. He returned to his modest home in Virginia, resumed his part-time teaching job at the local college, and spent his afternoons mentoring ROTC students, not about warfare, but about honor, composure, and character. The community started calling him the Quiet General. He chuckled every time. "I only made it to colonel," he'd say. But titles didn't matter to those he touched. To them, he was the man who stood when the world looked away. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From the Reynolds family. Inside was a photo. Jason's little sister, now 11, in a crisp cadet uniform, standing in front of a military academy. Her posture mirrored his. Her face carried quiet pride. On the back of the photo, a note from Tamika. She says she's not afraid to serve now. Because she knows men like you still wear the uniform. Carter held the photo for a long time. Then set it on his desk beside his medals, and whispered, "That's the only award I'll ever need." And so, the story of Colonel David Carter never became a documentary. Never became a blockbuster. It became something greater, a legacy whispered through actions, not broadcast through sound bites. It became a reminder in every airport terminal. In every uniformed handshake. In every folded flag returned to a grieving family. That one man's dignity, unshaken, unmoved, can spark 1,000 acts of compassion. Because sometimes, the strongest stand is the one made in silence.